Good afternoon, Lismore. And today in the Poets' Corner, we are interviewing two elderly Lismore poets that are brilliant poets in their own right, Judith Light and her husband, Bill Henderson. And they're with me here today. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, good morning.
Um,
And by the way, I'm thinking, that elderly, I heard a word this morning that I thought is preferable. And when it comes to classic, we're classics, yes?
Classic, that is a much better way to put it, I'd say. Classic poetry and classic poets, and in that respect, I say, I might start with you, Judith, just to get the interview rolling in a smooth succession. What we'll do is we'll mention a little bit about your work, and then also Bill's work, and a bit about what you guys have done together to help each other with poetry, because we know that a lot of poets out there struggle, and we all know that we could use the best help we can get. So I might start, Judith. How long have you been writing poetry for?
Well, most of my life, and that's, 80, I'm coming up 85 now. So, most of my life, especially in the early years. But I've written a lot of stuff when I was a child. I don't know why, but it used to come out of me. And it was all very romantic and poetic, and mostly about the moon and the environment and all those sort of things. And then when I was 16, the house was burnt down and all my stuff went, and I was left pretty much a sense of, well, what was the point in all that? So I didn't write again till I was an adult and married and came up against all sorts of challenging issues. I consider myself to be somewhat of an activist or issues poet.
An issues-oriented poet. And I guess, in the time when you lost your poetry as a youngster, this was a time where everything was written on paper, and if it was gone...
It was gone. Yeah, there was no anything on record, on tape, or on... the paper was gone.
Such a shame. And so you were saying that as you evolved your poetry, when you decided to pick up the pen again and get back into it, you started focusing on issues that were important to you. Would you like to tell us sort of about what some of those issues were?
Yeah, it was sort of forced out of me in a way. I have to say, suffering, pain, going through some tough times, all sorts of things. I mean, having had 5 children, and also been a nurse and I was a matron of a nursing home for 25 years, and in that time I had the children in the nursing home. So I was running the nursing home, pregnant all the time and having children. They came one after another each year. and sort of I was all pretty busy then. Amazing. But then issues started to emerge from divorce and strife in the marriage, strife with raising kids, all the political issues out there, and the injustices. And I've come to realise that the thing that's I'm trying to put together my autobiography and my collection of poems and publish. I have people saying to me all the time, publish. And I'm hoping to, and I realise now I was going to call my book A Little Bit of Light. And then I had the concept that, and then there'd be maybe a second issue would be A Little More Light. But I've realised that the thing that I'm mostly fighting against in my poetry is the lies that I've been told. And life's struggle is against everything from, females. My early stuff was realisation of what it meant to be only a girl, in our family especially, and in our culture, right through to all sorts of wartime issues. So I think my book will be The Lies They Told Me, because and each of the poems comes into one of those issues. I mean, one of the first, my mother used to say, When I would talk in horror of something that was going on or that I thought was terrible thing was happening, Mum would say, "Oh, darling, they wouldn't let that happen." And I think, who is this they that somehow or other there's this fantasy they out there that's looking after us? And I thought, no, she doesn't mean God, right? She meant, I think, it came to realise she meant the government, that they were protecting us and looking after us, and we had nothing to worry about, And in my working life and later life, I began to realise that they were the problem, actually, rather than the solution.
I would happen to agree with you there, and there's certainly an age divide between us both, but in that story, I feel so many things very similar, that maybe these words that you've put down on paper are very important, these messages, because these narratives that are told through our society by they're often very misleading, and it does create a very big gap where poetry can be born, like the cracks in the weeds.
Yeah, like the history they taught us at school, and having been also my mother was the child of settlement, so my great grandfather was one of the original settlers out in Queensland and Dalby, and one of the things that I remember, because people are always asking me, why do you do so much reconciliation stuff? Why are you on about the Aboriginal issues to such an extent? But it was very small. Our mum used to tell the stories of life on the station, and all how exciting it was, and from shearers to... And I remember saying to her, "But what about the Aboriginals, Mum?" And I don't know what age I was, but I'd got to be about, I don't know, 7 or 8 or something. And she said, "Don't worry, dear, they're all gone." And what shocked me, and I can hear it, I can feel the shock, because I was so shocked that she thought that I should be afraid. Like, why, don't worry. Because what I wanted to know was all about the Aboriginals, what they were like, did she know any of them? And so that stuck. And that's one of the first lies that
you were told.
I was told, and that I've investigated and reacted against. Yeah.
And we do see a lot of that, even at the remembering and healing ceremony the other day. We were talking about all sorts of things, from wartime things through to Indigenous history and everything in between, and it really does lend to the truth of what is that true story there, what is behind our poetry, and where do these lies that create this energy in us to want to find out more, to be inquisitive and to know. And you would have probably seen so much in your lifetime and so much change, and sadly we still have our politicians doing the sorry thing and all that sort of stuff, but there's very little acknowledgement of the severity of the changes in history. And I suppose it's really important for poets, and I do hope you get your work compiled and put into a book so people can read the history of the last bit of time. And maybe even if you've got a poet right now that you could read for us, that would be lovely.
This one's, after all, I think you were at the Ra event, and this one is my Anzac Day poem, and it fits with what we're talking about now. And it's, "Lest we forget, when will we ever remember?" And I actually wrote this back in 2002, but I presented it yesterday too at the Ra. "Lest we forget, say marching feet, and down the years and through the tears echo marching feet, resounding the call. They were heroes all and knew no retreat. Leather boots and felt, shiny buttons and belts, slouches and caps and silk in the sky, songs and memories to make us cry. Air Force blue and jungle green serge, bedecked with insignias so diverse, and all those medals on the chest, proving them history's very best. Youth sacrificed at war to save the rest. Fought for God and country, they say, and so we can live in peace today. Thank you, Digger. You saved our land. Oops. Is this deja vu? I hear an echo, other voices coming through. Oh, well, it's Anzac Day, and I too salute. I knitted many socks to put inside your boot. I lived on rations and saw Dad cry when they would not let him do or die. Saw the white feather sent to him in scorn because he had no uniform. I saw Uncle come home with chocolates and smokes that were dished out by the ton to the fighting blokes. I heard the tales of adventure in places of diverse language and swarthy faces. I don't dishonour, I don't even forget, and for the pain and the graves I have deep regret. I pray that you are all at last at peace, and that with your sacrifice God was pleased. It's just that history is a mighty big book, and there is much in there that deserves a look. Why magnify in full living glory one small page of Australia's story, then turn other pages with a blind eye? We must just move on, is the common cry. No one there that matters to me, nothing to question or even to see. No heroes, no glory, no family. Is terra nullius alive and well? Where are all the black heroes who fell in the war when Captain Cook arrived? Oh yeah, they keep his name alive. They fought for their God and country and for freedom from invading enemy. No medals, generations of marching feet, no citations, sentimental music's beat, no tombstones or maimed resting place, no telling of stories or pictures of face. So it seems history is a biased and most unfair race. Those who lie buried in our own desert sands have no value like those in foreign lands. At the going down of the sun, and again in the morning, we don't remember them. Reconciliation, we cry. Brother, shake it, put it there, mate. The past is the past, and it's all too late to listen, to be sorry, or even contemplate what your ancestors died for, or seek out their glorious fate. Learn how they lived and what made them great. And your veterans, those still alive, why should we salute them for having survived? Loud cry on Anzac Day is heard. The young must understand how well their fathers served this, their proud homeland. Well, reconciliation can only start when we move past denial and with open heart own all our past, even make some amends, and when that, lest we forget, matures and extends to all that preceded you and me, and includes our forbidden black history.
Judith Light, that was powerful, powerful stuff. Lest We Forget by Judith Light. Thank you so much for sharing that poem. Just hearing that gave me goosebumps. I'm looking down. You can't see this at home, listeners, but you can see the goosebumps on my arm. You might feel them through the radio. It was a real shock to hear in that poem the reversal, and to think that we as Australia were at one time invaders. We never ever think that we were the invaders, but that was incredibly powerful poetry. Thank you, Judith. And with you, Judith, here alongside we have Bill Henderson, and Bill, you are also at the Ra discussion meeting on Thursday night, and also at the Ra Anzac ceremony on in the Fountain Room on Anzac Day. And you sat down with me and had quite a bit of a discussion about your poetry and your messages behind what you do in your work. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what brought you to poetry and what's brought your poetry into, these issues that we seem to be touching on today on this Anzac episode?
In my teens, I wrote a couple of poems in careful rhythm and rhyme, and then got involved with life full-time and overtime. And it was in the mid-90s when I woke up on Christmas morning, and my ex-wife was gone. My eldest son was dead. My elder daughter was in England. The younger daughter had gone with her mother on the understanding that she would support her through Judy if I was not in touch. And it was a pretty dreary Christmas morning. So I thought, creative work banishes gloom, and I wrote my first mature age poem. And my aunt had invited me to lunch that day, and I read it to her on scraps of paper over lunch, and she said, "You ought to get to poets and poetry." And so I did. My work is often descriptive. I'm a visual person. I look out the back window of this beautiful house and I see a vista down across the valley up to the Nimbin Hills, and its beauty distracts me from any miseries I might be having at the time. So I write a lot of descriptive work, a landscape, more than still life, and also I am moved by misery, and so misery moves me to write a different kind of poetry, not quite as happy.
I would happen to agree with you there, Bill. I was looking over some of my poetry the other day trying to find a happy poem, and I just couldn't find any, and I realised that so much of my poetry is weaved with a struggle between us and them, and right and wrong, and good and bad, and the pains of the destruction and the hurt, but then also the cathartic action of writing a poem and getting out, or trying to create beauty out of, as you say, the misery and the pains, trying to create a beauty. And it was so beautiful for you to share a bit of your history and your story. And we were sort of mentioning a little bit earlier before the interview that you were talking about some of your childhood memories of experiencing the horrors of war through prose, and also some of the poetry that you do on that topic. Do you have a poem that you could recite to us, the good people of Lismore today, that could sort of give us a sense of what your poetry style is? You may even have one fitting for this occasion, be it that we've just had Anzac Day pass.
Yes, I wrote a poem yesterday to explain what remembering and healing is all about, and why I agree with their attitude to war and disagree with the increasingly militaristic treatment of Anzac Day by the government and the media. This poem is called Beyond Anzac Day. Lismore is right up to date We have just observed the 10th anniversary of the first annual meeting of Rahal, remembering and healing old wounds. Anzac Day claims to focus on being grateful to those who died in war to save us from foreign attackers, conveniently forgetting that in most of our wars we were the foreign attackers, laying waste to someone else's sovereign homeland and killing their citizens. First in South Africa, then Turkish Gallipoli and continental Europe, awash with our Aussie blood spilt to support some other country's grab for power and control over the locals. My granny lost a son fighting England's war in distant Syria during World War II. Just once it was self-defence, keeping Japan from enslaving us. Then back to joining our richer friends trying to increase their influence in Vietnam, Iraq and Afghanistan, with so-called collateral damage to the local population when necessary. Ra focuses on the human cost of war, no matter who got hurt, and recognises the Baha'i belief that war is always bad, and the solution is unity and cooperation in place of macho conflict and bigger war memorials.
Wow. And that was only written yesterday, which is amazing, because being at the Ra ceremony and hearing about people talking about peace and the extending the hand of peace rather than the glorification of war. And, you know, we speak of the war to end all wars, and then since World War II has ended, we're allied with America, and we haven't actually won a war since World War II. And to that part, we have, in some senses, been the bad guy. And I guess that is pretty good material to write poetry about, because if we are using our words while we have breath in us to extend what we've learned in our lifetimes and share that with the people around us, whoever's willing to listen, poems like that really are incredibly important for the long running. And I would like one day, hopefully, to see poetry recitals where such poetry is performed on Anzac Day ceremonies, where the poetry of war is explored in its full depth and its direction, rather than, you know, what we currently seem to be doing. Judith, do you have anything to say on that?
Andrew, I'm bringing in another voice from the past here. This is a poem written by my Uncle Bill, and it's entitled Resettlement 1919. And this is now 2019, so we're talking 100 years ago. And this gentleman, my Uncle Bill, my father's brother, was in the Air Corps, and he received the French Croix de Guerre for bravery, and several other medals for being shot down over France, etc. He was actually a solicitor, and he went off to war as an officer. And his coming back after the war, this is it. And by the way, resettlement, there's another issue in the whole Aboriginal situation, that did you know, and do people realise that Aboriginal veterans that came back from the war, from the First World War, etc., that other soldiers were given soldier settlement blocks, and the irony of it is that the very property that my mother was born on and grew up on in Dalby was broken up into soldier settlement blocks after the war. And did you know that the Aboriginal were not entitled to an allotment because they were not citizens? It's breathtaking, isn't it, in this sort of hypocrisy and But this is an educated Englishman coming back from the Glorious War and his resettlement experience. Resettlement 1919, and by the way, he's subtitled it, Will You Give Them a Stone? And Bill was able to remind me that that's actually taken from the Bible. Yeah? You want to... with the concept of...
The full quotation is, and I misquote, if your child cries for food, will you offer them a stone?
I know I wasn't aware of that, but... So who can give back the time that is gone? Who can give back the days before we answered a country's call and left our separate ways? Was it in vain, the labour, the sacrifice? Was it in vain? Are they years that the folk locust has eaten, the years when the dragon was slain? They made us a joyous welcome, with buntings and beanfests and bands. Then they shut their eyes to our further needs, their ears to our just demands. It's pleasant to see you safely back. It's good that you were not killed. Your name is on a roll of honour, but your place, well, that's been filled. Only a bar of ribbon or a strip of golden braid to mark the bigger men who went from the smaller men who stayed. We dwell with a fierce obsession on your gallant deeds before, and we cheered when you passed in procession. Surely you don't want more. And another irony in that is that his brother, my father, was in fact unable to go to war, and he and my mother, because my mother was in the Land Army, and they took the primary services way rather than going to war, and he suffered also a lot of abuse for being a pommiqueur and given white feathers, and one of the things that was said at Ra was that various people started their talk by saying, "Fortunately, I wasn't affected by war." There is no such person not affected by the war.
Very strong words, Judith, and I must say that I have to agree there. And we are all affected in our own way, and even on the land we stand is the signifier of the wars, and all of them. We're going to go to a quick song now, and it's Corner Group.
Do you realise that the title Mozzie is because they're supposed to be short and sharp with bite, the poems? So, is that right?
In retrospect, yes. Originally, no. Judith, Gloria Yates started the Mozzie as Micropress Oz, and there was also a Hutt Valley Micropress in New Zealand, which just folded after 25 years last year. And the way that English tends to shorten itself, the Micropress Oz became Oz, and then people looked at what it offered, which was small poems with bite, and backfitted that retrospective description.
too right. I really like that you've brought poetry into the title of the magazine, The Moz. It's fantastic.
I'd like to offer a short, sharp one with bite, yeah? And start to lighten things up a bit, yeah? Yeah. And it's also a comment on my situation, our situation. And it's called The Last Post, which seems very relevant, Anzac Day, huh? Yeah. Okay. Post-menstrual, post-menopausal. Let's face it, post-men. Post-divorce, post-widowhood, post-mothering. But then, do chicks ever really leave the hen? Post-employable, post-taxable, post-bank interest to pay. Post-negotiable, banks say, and send the old girl away. Post-feminist activist, movers and shakers those days, shaking more now than moving. Who wants our nanny say? Post-dated wisdom from years that nobody needs or hears. Well, Shirley MacLaine was born the same day as me. Her autobiography said post should not be. Never say never again was her philosophy. So, a fourth try at men, and if I'm a slow learner then, and I'm not post-functional yet. Well, perhaps a little, but doesn't everyone's knickers sweat? And I still possess all my fallacies, and I'm not post-mortem yet.
I really like the play on words there, Judith. Really quite punny. Very good. Very punny. And I don't know about you, Bill, what you think of Judith's poem. I think you'd be very proud of some of the stuff she's writing here. It's brilliant. It seems like you guys influence each other a lot. Is there any poetry that you would like to recite in return?
I'm a bit slow and steady, and I haven't left Ra yet. This morning, I decided to write something else on the topic while it was front centre in my head. And this one is, for me, rather new. I write in several different genres. Suddenly began writing about 25 years ago in the classical rhythm and rhyme style I'd used in my teens. Soon moved over to Japanese-style poems based on the syllable count in each line, like the one I read to you a minute ago. Actually, a long string of connected haiku. There's another Japanese style that I learnt from gifted Brisbane Aboriginal poet Sam Wagon Watson. Find his stuff. It's called a haibun. Interesting. Starts with a short descriptive passage in prose and ends with a haiku or a tanka. That's the old original Japanese haiku style with 5 lines instead of the 3 lines that we're more used to. Here's my first ever haibun, also written about the Ra meeting in the Fountain Room last Thursday. Rahau Haibun. In the Lismore Fountain Room we filled a ring of 60 chairs, with a moderator to give us 3 minutes each to share our personal memories of war and its aftermath. I was most moved by a third-generation Greek-Australian and one from Sardinia, whose grandparents had both been bombed in their homes by Allied air forces during World War II. And then they'd taken refuge in Australia in the hope of being safe here from warfare and all its dreadful consequences. Anzac Day is a real problem for them and their descendants. Why should they be loudly grateful to the Australian allies of their self-claimed liberators and support the local branch of the continuing international war industry that brought death, devastation and displacement to their ancestors? Rahau offers hope that we can refocus on cooperation and unity and replace division and entrenched enmity with forgiveness, humanity, and love.
Thank you, Bill. And being at that Ra meeting on Anzac Day, I totally understand what you were saying in that poetry, and the emotion that boiled up in that room from people who were telling the story of being Greek Australian or Italian Australian or whatever their ancestral history be it, and to say who the we are. You know, when they say we, they fought for us and the them and the we has been so broken down these days that Australia is really searching for a new identity where we are almost seemingly lost. And that energy of the people in that room that day was one of collaboration and of searching for meaning and searching for answers in, as we can all agree, the chaos of war. And they also mentioned about how wars, they may be fought on international scales, but we all have the war inside us as well, and it's the personal battles that we as individuals have to overcome to be able to get along with our neighbours, our brothers, our friends, even the people that we disagree with. And there was a Muslim cleric who spoke on one of the evenings, and he spoke about opening his chest up and his beating heart and letting love in, and the array of poetry that comes out of the Bible, out of the Quran, out of these different religions, and then out of our emotions, out of our suffering, out of our victories, out of our understanding and our hindsight. And, you know, it really was just a very moving ceremony, and it was very moving poetry. I can see why you wrote what you've written there, Bill, and it's amazing that you turned that around in 2 days. That's a mark of a very good poet. I really, really do appreciate you both taking the time here. And before we wrap up the interview, we'll explore if you each have a poem that you could do again, or even tell us about your influences. Bill, you mentioned Sam Wag and Watson and Japanese haiku style. Judith, I'm curious as to some of your influences, and maybe even if you have a poem for us.
Okay, well, Judith Wright, of course, and I've always been delighted to be mistaken for her by students and kids who say, "Oh, we're studying your poetry at school," and I say, "Sorry, not." And also, of course, Noonuckle, Ruth Walker, Kath Walker, Oodgeroo Noonuckle, the Aboriginal poet. That I also just love her poetry and admire her. And, you know, but the conversation that your direction with Bill there, going back to the Ra, etc., and the whole business of war, and then both Bill and I are Baha'is, and the whole push of the Baha'i faith is for world peace and unity. And you mentioned, for instance, the Muslim cleric, etc. But this one explains my position on all that, and it came out of the bombing of the Twin Towers. And it's called The Big Y in the Sky. War in New York, City of the Covenant, and that's a Baha'i concept. Why, Mum? Why? And what do I tell my son about the obscene love affair between religion and the gun? They are killing in God's name when all is fired and done. This is profanity. What is their defence? Where is common sense? God is love, you said when you tucked us into bed, and do unto others the golden rule of our Sunday school. Thou shalt not kill, the good book said. And yet now, in New York, thousands are dead. Mum is God a fool? Where in all this mess is godness? Who do they pray to, Muslim and Jew? There are so many teachings, Buddhist and Zen, Bhagavad Gita and Torah, both sacred texts. Bible and Quran, God speak to men, yet we grow daily even more perplexed. I try to read these ancient words, but frankly, Mum, they seem absurd. Explain, Mum, explain. They say life will never be the same, and I am in deep spiritual pain. I remember it well. The seeking, questioning hell. Over 20 years passed, in darkest night, at the end of my tunnel came a glimmer of light. Like the sense that came from global facts that did away with the earth being flat. Pieces of puzzle fell into place, befitting a world that travels in space, a world where we can understand a globe that is one universal land, where lines on a map or colour of skin cannot divide this one world's kin. And best of all, God made sense when I found his teachings in present tense. Found a timeline of history with prophets and enlightened men for a particular there and then, where baking desert under the feet made perfect sense of kosher meat, and living with camels in desert sands made urgent need for hygiene with hands, where the language and stories had to relate to a man, his oxen and his chattel mate. People didn't even know how their body's seed could grow, had no books, just tablets of stone, and the whole world consisted of their bit alone. Knew nothing of people in distant places, their colours, other races. First light to this child of round table knights, who killed infidels to protect our rights, was to learn the truth of our history, removed from the bias of men, who clothed it all in a mystery, perpetuating an evil enemy, them. When I found the infidel had no horns and followed the word of God, but they called on him as Allah, well, that didn't seem to matter a lot. As it all began to unfold, came the shattering shock of being told that all the prophets taught the same. First, love of God and man, and that all the other teachings were just a regional social plan fashioned for the age and for that place on history's page. I could see how any God would cry at the slowness of our learning and the madness we apply when we justify deep hate for the clothes a fellow wore or the kind of food he ate. And all said another one would come when their time and race was run. But followers, clinging to the past, demand each is the only, or definitely the last. They heap fanatics' fury on any newly risen one, greeting one with a cross, another with a gun. As in Jerusalem, so in Iran, landed the three wise men. In 1844 it all happened again. And I've lost the last page, which goes on to say, this is why your mother is Baha'i.
Wow. And it all ties together really well. The rhythm almost flows like a sermon or it's just got this energy that you're just giving out there to the people. It's really, really beautiful poetry. I look around, thankfully enough to be invited into your home. I look around and I see artifacts from so many different cultures, and I hear your poetry, both of your poetry, and you tell stories cross-culturally, cross-time, generation, and everything in between. And it's just very, very beautiful. And as Bill was saying earlier on in the interview, we have such sorrow and such misery in so many aspects of our life, and all faiths do lead to trying to overcome these small pains and small differences to reach a higher sense of peace and sense of love for themselves and for each other and everything in between. We are coming up to the end of our interview, and it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you both. But before I let you go, we're curious if maybe you would have any tips or any hints for any upcoming poets who might be curious or nervous to put pen and paper to page. A lot of people out there, they feel like their work isn't good enough and that they don't have the courage to go further with it. But I'm just very curious as to what you, being very experienced poets in your own right, what advice you might have for the young poets out there.
I believe that every poet's poetry should be a bit different because it should be honest to self. And I'll finish up my bit with one of the poems in my first self-published book of poetry from 2002, which was called Two is Not a Crowd. This is the last poem in the book, and it's meant as an encouragement. Sunset in Springwood, which was where I lived then. 'Tween the grey day's hem and the grey dusk's cold is a stripe of blue round a disk of gold. Warm soft light turns blue grass yellow. The world's so bright that blue moods mellow. When your bed is cold 'cause you've none to hold, be out of doors when you feel the cold as the falling sun gives all its gold for petticoats on every cloud that dulled your day and made you grey. When gold turns pink you start to think you'll get fate's wink so glasses clink some future day. So come what may, when grey thoughts stray across the embers of your day, remember what keeps gloom away. Jam-pack each day with work and play of every kind. Fill up your mind with rainbow hues, and then you'll have no space for blues.
That is very beautiful, Bill. Thank you.
Okay, you want some advice from me? This is a little short one. And the advice is do not accept the lies they told you. Okay? And this one's called Joanna Livingston Seagull. And it's about early discoveries of how clipped are the wings of a girl raised to be good and for marriage. See me? I'm great. I hate the ones who said shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't. The parent, teacher, bureaucrat. The ones who told me where it's at. It's not there. And it's not fair so to mislead, cripple faith and stifle noble deed. If your feet are stuck to the ground, don't try to impound my spirits, my rights. Try to block off my sights set on the sky. I am leaving you to your how and why. I can fly. You doubted me 'cause you had no wings.
Very beautiful words from both of you, Bill Henderson, Judith Light. It's been an absolute pleasure having you both on the program today. We will endeavour to put up any information for all our listeners out there who might want to get a copy of Two Is Not a Crowd or some issues of the Mozzie. And Judith, when you get your work up into a published format, please let us know.
Hurry up, I'm running out of time.
We would like to have you on air again, and when you have your stuff out there, we can have you on and you can tell us all about it.
And by the way, you know, David Hallett has just won a big award for his best poetry at the festival, and you know he runs the stand-up poet, and I was the original poet that stood up with him back then. So he always says when we have anniversaries, and what we've got one coming up. The next one is a big anniversary.
28.
Yeah, but he's got it counted in poetry hours, I think, and he said X number of hours. Anyhow, David, congratulations, well deserved, and I want to thank you for the fact that I have done poetry, and it was my opportunity at the very first of the stand-up poets. Not only the opportunity, but the pressure, that very thing of, come on, you can do it sort of thing. And David's done that for so many poets in this area. So I want to congratulate him and thank him and draw people's attention to the next stand-up poets, which is going to be
The third Wednesday of the month, every month.
at the Rouse Hotel in the Green Room.
That's right. It's 7:30, third Wednesday of every month, and I must say David is the reason I do poetry as well. He gave me my start, first poem I ever recited in front of a person was it David Hallett's Live Poets, and I take my hat off to David. Congratulations on winning that prize. And I, much like David and much like yourselves, we are all poets together, and all our listeners out there, you all have poetry within you. If you have a heartbeat, then you have the rhythm of poetry, and we do hope to see you come down and experience the night. Join the community, because it doesn't matter how old you are or what faith you have or what you believe in or where you come from or what your history is. Poetry really does unite people across all barriers and boundaries.
Goodbye from the classic poets.